We're all here because of relationships, connections, conditions, interactions, influences. That's the truth of this moment. That's the truth of every moment. So sometimes when I do this reflection, I think about, since I went to India to begin with through college, I was still a student, I think about the Board of Regents of the state of New York, which gave me a scholarship so I could go to college, so I could get to India. Because they're part of why I'm sitting here in this room. And sometimes when I do this reflection, I think about those people whose actions have really hurt me. Not just the ones I find annoying or irritating, but those times where I really felt like I was on an edge. And I thought, you know what? If I don't find some answers that are different, I'm just not going to be free. Or I've got to find another route to happiness somehow. Because they're part of why I'm here too. And this is true for everybody. That we have just this bigger sense of what life is about. Ourselves and others. But I'll give you two examples that really threaten my whole vision of reality. This is my favorite reflection, so I try to do it everywhere I speak. And one night this last year in September, I was in New York City, and there were a whole bunch of events that this place, Trinity Church, was sponsoring as they were leading up to the 10th anniversary of 9/11. And I was speaking. It was one of those events and leading meditation, and I was doing it as a part. There's a part of Trinity Church called Charlotte's Place, which is like a drop-in center where people can just come in and use the computers or just have a place to be. And so some of the programs were there. So I was there, and it's this wonderful room right downtown near the World Trade Center site, and with big plate glass windows. So I used that reflection. And this woman came up to me and she said, actually, I was just walking down the street. And I looked inside and I thought, I'm going to go in there. And I thought, oh no, there's a crack. But of course, she had her own confluence of conditions. It was just different. And the example, and then not too long after that, I was teaching in Philadelphia, actually, and I was doing a benefit for this preschool, which was located in the basement of a church. And the program was in the church, and they had a lot of different kinds of school activities there, and I used the reflection, and this woman came up to me and she said, well, actually, I thought tonight was the PTA meeting. And I just came. That was the wrong night. And I thought, okay. Except for those two people, reality is such that we are all born here out of all this confluence of connections, and they too, it's just a little different. In that. So that's a kind of understanding that's cultivated. It's not untrue, it's not manufactured, but the understanding is cultivated by the way we use our attention. So from generosity to morality to loving kindness, and then comes meditation as we know it. So isn't that interesting? There are a lot of foundational practices that are kind of classically put into place. And the reason for that is, I mean, it doesn't have to be that way, of course. And we see that it doesn't have to be that way. But the reason that it is so classically that way is because it's described as people being given the tools they need or the strength they need, so that when one is looking very directly at your own experience, you've got some of that joy, you've got some of that self-respect from a simpler life. You've got some of that sense of connection to a bigger picture of life. And then we practice, so it's really kind of fascinating. Now, I'll talk much more, especially on Saturday. The nature of that practice is really like a skills training in stabilizing our attention so that we can be much more concentrated more easily. I'm smiling because I was teaching somewhere, I was teaching a weekend somewhere, and the word that is commonly used for that sense, I'm sure you know this, of centeredness, stability, groundedness, of attention is concentration. And this was like on a Saturday, I was teaching, and somebody came up to me and he said, "How much money would it take for me to offer you for you to promise to never use the word concentration again?" So I said, "Let's talk." Clearly he had an association with the word that was sort of horrible, you know, strained holding of your attention, repression of everything else, pushing away whatever might be happening.
Better.
You want to give me the other one?
Oh yeah.
Thank you. You know, and so he had just this awful association, and I said, okay, how's the word stability, or steadiness, or steadfastness of attention? And he liked that. And I said, okay, you don't have to give me any money. It's just every time I say concentration, because that's what I'm used to saying, you translate it in your mind to stability or steadiness. And it said, of course, that if we pursue a practice of concentration and our lives are, you know, very agitated, we're worried about something we've done or what we've said, it's very, we have no clear path to making amends, we've got this big dilemma. It's not that it's impossible to concentrate, it's just going to be harder. Because we're going to just spend a certain amount of time trying to figure it out, you know, and feeling bad, feeling regret, feeling remorse, and all of that. So that's sort of a clear example of why, in a way, if the Buddha were from New York City, the way he would phrase it would be something like, give yourself a break. You know, don't try to do it in the hardest way possible. It's not impossible, and certainly we see that, but you're kind of not allowing yourself all those building blocks to make it as easy as possible. So that's the first whole domain of real development of meditative tools, is concentration. It's steadiness, settledness, centeredness of attention. And then of course there is mindfulness, which is the word of the hour. I always say I'm really intrigued by the ways that the word mindfulness is just spreading out in the culture. I teach once a month or so in Washington, D.C., and I often take a train from New York City to get to Washington, and I always listen for the conductor who, these days, many conductors will say, please be mindful of the gap between the train and the station. And then I'm always happy. And sometimes they say, please be careful, which is actually what they mean, even when they say mindful. And that's not as exciting for me. Really, you hear it everywhere. I was teaching in New York City once, and I'd been listening to the news just before I went, to where I was going, and I said, wow, I was listening to the news, and the person I was listening to just kept using the word mindful, and then I spoke, and then it was time for questions, and someone raised their hand, and they said, what news channel do you watch? But it's everywhere, really.